So this gets us to our next topic because here we go. Moody's has downgraded the U.S. credit outlook. They haven't downgraded our credit rating. We are still AAA in the eyes of Moody, the highest possible credit rating. But they switched our outlook from stable to negative, and I wonder why, Ben.
I just think the idea, first of all, of a credit outlook is funny. It's like we it's too soon to say anything about your rating, but you're on the fritz. Yeah.
It's really funny. Mm-hmm. Obviously, this comes off the back when Fitch downgraded the U.S. credit rating.
Yeah.
And so here we are. The Republicans have made the country fairly ungovernable, put us to the brink of shutdown multiple times, put us to when we almost went over the debt ceiling, unable to pay back our bills, right? Mm-hmm. So that obviously hurts our credit ratings. But there's also some other things that do genuinely need to change about our fiscal policy if we are to not have a credit downgrading. The truth is we do have a lot of debt. The truth is the rate in which our debt is growing is unacceptable. Our deficits are too big. Too much of our annual deficit goes to interest payments. All of that can be true. Mm-hmm. But there's two ways to go about this. The Republican response is they want to cut 8% of federal spending across the board, which, as we all know, shrinks the overall economy. We know that shrinks GDP. We know that. Joe Biden has issues with the deficit as well and wants to shrink it through a different means. This is the Democrat way of shrinking it. They want to grow the economy through more government spending in some instances, in cutting back, and tax higher earners to reduce our overall deficit. We can match what we bring in to what we spend out.
Yeah.
We need to have a better tax system that is better at capturing money from the highest earners. And a lot of these problems, they won't go away, but they'll start to be dealt with.
Yeah, and there are ways that we have already seen the Biden administration doing this. We just, on our last episode, talked about huge Q3 GDP growth that the U.S. had, 4.9% rate in the last quarter, which is going to help a lot in terms of the tax revenue that we're going to be bringing in. Biden passed a 15% corporate minimum tax in the U.S., which is going to be great because there are some enormous companies that, with the use of tax credits and other loopholes, have avoided paying any taxes on their profits in the U.S. for a long time. I know Nike is one of those companies. And so there are ways to do this. In the budget that Biden proposed earlier this spring, which unfortunately without having a Democrat-controlled Senate and House isn't going to go anywhere, but he proposed raising the marginal tax rate, the top marginal tax rate, which right now is 37%, the lowest it's been in, I think, 100 years or something like that. Mm-hmm. That rate used to be up at 80, 90% back
95% under Dwight Eisenhower.
Yes, back when we had compressed wages and not enormous inequality. We can, if we ratchet that rate back up, not only are we certainly going to be collecting more taxes from the individuals at the top, but our economy is going to be spurned into more growth because that's the effect of reducing inequality.
Yeah.
Once you have more money closer to the bottom end, it's circulating more often.
Yes, and we see that right now, actually. If I can get to that. I have a chart at the very bottom of the page, Ben. We can see that when we look at the top of page 11. So when we look at the last year of wage growth, the bottom 10% of wage earners have seen record wage growth. The 50%, the 50th percentile of wage earners basically have the same wages from 2020. But when you look at the bottom 10% of wage earners, their wages have almost gone up by almost 10%.
Wow.
Over the last year.
Yeah.
That is an awesome sign of the bottom being brought up into the middle class. And that's a lot because of Biden's agenda. I also want to talk about other ways Joe Biden has been working on raising revenues. Mm-hmm. He put on a 1% stock buyback tax on all companies through the Inflation Reduction Act. He says if reelected, he wants to raise that from 1% to 4%,
huge.
Which is huge because so much of our money gets financialized and instead of going into real assets, goes into the financial money trading game.
Yep.
And if we can push corporations to take more of their excess profits and invest it back into real real material rather than make it into just financial gains like that grows the economy, boosting our revenue. So again, this is the different philosophies on how to tackle our debt crisis. We are also having trouble with our debt right now because interest rates are going so high. Moody says that because of higher interest rates, without effective fiscal policy measures to reduce government spending or increase revenues, Moody's expects the U.S. financial deficits to remain very large, significant weakening the debt affordability. What does debt affordability mean? Debt affordability means how much of our annual spending goes towards interest. This is a very important thing to recognize. When we spend a lot of our money yearly on interest payments, that leaves us less money to pay for better social services, better business investment. So right now, I want to bring our attention to talking about how much of our annual deficit, how much of our annual spending is spent on just our interest payments. Now, we are approaching a record high. We are currently spending about 10% every year on our interest payments. By 2035, we're expecting to get to 18% if nothing changes. This will be surpassing the height of American interest payments, which was 1995. We were spending 15% every year of our government spending was just on interest alone. Something has to change.
Why was that? I'm like tangent, but in the 90s,
I couldn't tell
right?
you.
It feels like the 90s were such a relatively calm time for us post Cold War, right? A lot less reason to be spending.
Well,
massively.
it spiked at 1980.
Okay.
Oh, I wonder why.
Yeah.
Did it have something to do with Ronald Reagan destroying our tax base and tripling our deficit for the first time ever as a president?
Yep.
Maybe it had something to do with that.
Probably.
Maybe it had something to do with Ronald Reagan's incredible deficit spending that took a decade to fix.
Yeah.
Maybe that.
Wow. Man, Clinton was really just wrenching that shit down.
Clinton did. Clinton was the last president to have a surplus, no deficit at all, right?
Yeah.
So there we go. That's what Moody's is saying. Janet Yellen obviously does not agree with this downgrade. Obviously she's going to say that.
Yeah, of course.
And she does not like that this is coming at this specific time, and we'll talk about that.